You have felt it your entire life, that quiet distance between you and everyone else. Not because you chose isolation, but because your mind operates on a frequency most people cannot detect. They call it loneliness. You know it as clarity. And if you're sitting here alone right now, watching this, understand something crucial. Your solitude is not a punishment. It is a filter. The world mistakes aloneness for weakness. Machiavelli understood it as the sharpest form of power. Because while crowds distract themselves with noise, the solitary mind sees what others miss. It calculates while they react. It positions while they chase. And by the end of this, you will understand why your isolation has never been the problem. It has always been your advantage. Most people fear being alone because they confuse presence with value. They measure their worth by how many people surround them, how busy their calendar looks, how quickly someone responds to their messages. But here is what they never realize. Constant company is not connection. It is distraction dressed as belonging. You have likely noticed this pattern throughout your life. The more people around you, the less you could think clearly. The louder the room, the quieter your mind had to become just to survive the noise. You were not antisocial. You were protecting something most people do not even know they possess. A mind that processes depth, not volume. And depth requires space that crowds cannot provide. Before we go further, if this resonates with you, subscribe to Silent Strategist. This channel exists for those who think differently and refuse to apologize for it. We do not chase trends here. We dissect power, perception, and the psychology of minds that operate alone by design, not by accident. Machiavelli spent years in isolation, not by choice initially, but by consequence. After losing his political position, he was exiled from Florence, stripped of influence, surrounded by silence he never asked for. Most people would have collapsed under that weight. He did something different. He used the solitude to write the most penetrating analysis of power the world had ever seen. The Prince was not written in a crowded room full of advisors. It was written alone, at night, in a small study where no one interrupted his thoughts. That isolation gave him something the crowd never could have, perspective without distortion. Machiavelli understood what sharp minds instinctively know. Aloneness removes the static. It strips away the need to perform, to explain, to soften your observations for people who are not ready to hear them. When you are alone, your mind stops translating itself into digestible pieces for others. It operates at full capacity. And that capacity is where real power grows. There is a specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with the absence of people. It is the loneliness of seeing patterns no one else notices, of predicting outcomes others cannot fathom, of recognizing manipulations that the rest of the room treats as normal conversation. You have experienced this repeatedly. Someone says something, and within seconds, you have mapped their true intention, identified the gap between their words and their goals, and calculated 3 moves ahead. Meanwhile, everyone else is still nodding along, completely unaware. This is not arrogance. It is pattern recognition operating at a speed most brains are not built to handle. Research into cognitive processing has shown that individuals with higher analytical intelligence experience what psychologists call the isolation of accelerated perception. Your mind finishes analyzing situations before others have even framed the question. And that gap, that space between your awareness and their understanding, creates a loneliness that no amount of social interaction can fix. Because the loneliness is not about being physically alone. It is about being mentally unreachable. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the danger of depending on the crowd for validation. He observed that people who need constant approval become slaves to perception. They twist themselves into shapes that please others, and in doing so, they lose the very clarity that could have elevated them. He said the wise man does what is necessary, not what is popular. And necessity requires a mind unclouded by the need to be liked. If you have spent your life feeling separate, misunderstood, or out of sync with those around you, consider this. What if that separation was not a defect? What if it was a design feature? A mind sharp enough to see through social performances cannot fully participate in them. A mind that values truth over comfort will always feel distant from people who prioritize the opposite. Your aloneness is not a failure of connection. It is the cost of operating with a level of perception most people will never develop. Here is where it gets more precise. Aloneness gives you something crowds can never offer: the ability to think without interference. Most people cannot sit in silence for more than a few minutes before reaching for their phone, turning on the television, or finding someone to talk to. They are not seeking connection. They are fleeing their own thoughts. You are different. You can sit with your mind for hours, days even, without needing external validation or distraction. That capacity is rare, and it is lethal in the right hands. Because while others are filling their time with noise, you are refining your understanding. You are connecting ideas across disciplines. You are identifying leverage points in systems others do not even see as systems. Machiavelli did not need a crowd to sharpen his mind. Neither do you. Solitude is not emptiness. It is concentrated mental work that produces insights crowds could never generate. Most people talk to think. You think before you talk. And that difference changes everything. When people process their thoughts out loud, they give away their position before it is fully formed. They reveal uncertainty, bias, and blind spots without realizing it. You do not have that problem. Your internal dialogue happens in private. By the time you speak, your conclusion has already survived multiple rounds of scrutiny. This is why people often find you slow to respond or hesitant to commit. They mistake your thoroughness for indecision. The truth is the opposite. You refuse to speak until the idea is defensible. That discipline, that refusal to think out loud, is what separates strategic minds from reactive ones. Machiavelli understood that silence is not the absence of thought. It is the evidence of it. If you've been criticized for being too quiet, too reserved, or too detached, recognize what is actually happening. People are uncomfortable with the fact that they cannot read you. They are used to others who broadcast every thought and feeling in real time. Your restraint unsettles them because it denies them access, and access is control. When you keep your thoughts private, you keep your power intact. Let me ask you something. How many times have you been in a room and felt the shift before anyone else noticed it? The conversation that turned tense half a second before the tone changed. The person whose smile did not match their posture. The agreement that everyone celebrated but you knew would collapse within a month. You did not need evidence. You felt it. This is not mysticism. It is data processing happening faster than conscious thought. Your mind takes in micro-expressions, tonal shifts, word choices, body language, and contextual inconsistencies, then produces a conclusion before you can even articulate why. Researchers describe this as intuitive expertise. It develops in people who have spent years observing human behavior without the distortion of social performance. You were not busy performing. You were watching. And that watchfulness built a database most people never accumulate. Now your mind cross-references everything it sees against that database in milliseconds. The result is a sense of knowing that feels almost supernatural, but it is just pattern recognition operating at a level crowds cannot access. Is it better to be loved or feared? This single question, posed over 500 years ago, still echoes in the halls of power, in boardrooms, and even in our daily lives. The man who asked it, Niccolò Machiavelli, has been called a teacher of evil, a cynic, a realist, and a genius. But who was he really, and why do his ideas about power and human nature remain so electrifyingly relevant today? Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into the mind of Machiavelli, the Renaissance diplomat and political philosopher whose name became synonymous with cunning and ruthless ambition. We'll explore the core ideas from his most famous work, The Prince Asterisk, and unpack what he truly believed about how to gain and maintain power. Forget the caricature of the mustached whirling villain. The real Machiavelli is far more complex and, frankly, more interesting. Let's set the scene. Machiavelli lived in 5th, 10th, and 16th century Florence, a time of incredible political instability. Italy was a patchwork of warring city-states, constantly under threat from powerful foreign invaders like France and Spain. Alliances were made and broken in the blink of an eye. Machiavelli saw princes rise and fall, governments collapse, and fortunes change overnight. He wasn't writing from an ivory tower. He was on the front lines, a diplomat and official who witnessed the brutal realities of politics firsthand. This context is crucial. The Prince wasn't a philosophical fantasy. It was a practical handbook, a desperate plea for a strong leader to unite Italy and save it from chaos. So, what did Machiavelli observe about human nature? In his view, people are fundamentally self-interested, fickle, and ungrateful. He wrote that men are quicker to forget the death of their father than the loss of their inheritance. A harsh statement, but from his perspective, it was a simple truth. He believed that while people might talk about morals and ideals, when push comes to shove, their own security and benefit come first. They are easily swayed by appearances and quick to turn on a leader when things go wrong. This pessimistic view of humanity is the foundation of his entire political philosophy. He wasn't saying this is how people should be, but how he observed them to be. This brings us to his most famous and controversial piece of advice, the question of being loved versus feared. Machiavelli's answer is pragmatic. Ideally, a ruler should be both. But since it's difficult to be both, he argues, it is much safer to be feared than loved. Why? Because love, he says, is held by a chain of obligation which, since men are self-interested, is broken at every opportunity for their own advantage. Fear, on the other hand, is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails. A leader who relies only on the people's love is building their power on shaky ground. The moment the leader asks for a sacrifice or makes an unpopular decision, that love can evaporate. Fear, however, is a more constant motivator. Now, it's vital to understand what Machiavelli meant by feared. He wasn't advocating for senseless cruelty or tyranny. In fact, he explicitly warns against being hated. A hated ruler is a vulnerable ruler. He says a prince must avoid seizing the property and the women of his subjects at all costs, because that is what breeds true hatred. The fear he recommends is a respectful, awe-inspiring fear, the kind a child might have for a strict but fair parent. It's about establishing authority and ensuring that your commands are obeyed, not about terrorizing your population. The goal is stability and order, not personal sadism. Another core Machiavellian concept is the idea of *virtù fortuna. These aren't just Italian words for virtue and fortune. For Machiavelli, *fortuna* is the unpredictable, chaotic force of luck in the world. He compares it to a raging river that can flood and destroy everything in its path. You can't control the river, but you can prepare for it. You can build dams and levees. That preparation, that skill, ambition, and strength of character to master circumstances, that is *virt. A successful prince, according to Machiavelli, has the virtù recognize opportunity, act decisively, and tame the wild forces of *fortuna*. He can't just be a good person in the traditional sense. He must be adaptable, and sometimes willing to do what is necessary, even if it's not conventionally moral. This leads us to the infamous idea that the ends justify the means. It's important to note that Machiavelli never actually wrote that exact phrase. What he did say was that in the actions of all men, and especially of princes, one must look to the final result. If a prince succeeds in conquering and maintaining his state, his methods will always be judged honorable and will be praised by everyone. In other words, success creates its own morality. If a ruler's seemingly cruel or deceptive actions lead to a stable, prosperous, and secure state, the people will ultimately thank him for it. His primary responsibility isn't to be a saint. It's to protect the state. If that requires deception, manipulation, or even violence, then so be it. The ultimate end is the survival and well-being of the state itself. Think about it this way. Is it more moral for a leader to be honest and kind, but so ineffective that his country descends into civil war and famine, causing immense suffering? Or is it more moral for a leader to be cunning and sometimes ruthless, but successfully navigate threats to create peace and security for his people? Machiavelli would argue for the latter. He separates private morality from political necessity. The rules that apply to an ordinary citizen don't always apply to a ruler, because the ruler is responsible for the lives of millions. So, is Machiavelli still relevant? Absolutely. Look at modern politics. Leaders carefully craft their public image, using social media to appear strong and relatable, a classic Machiavellian tactic of managing appearances. Nations engage in complex diplomatic maneuvering, forming alliances of convenience and using economic pressure, which is a modern form of the power plays he described. In the business world, CEOs make tough decisions to ensure a company's survival, sometimes involving layoffs or aggressive competition, echoing the principle of prioritizing the health of the state to corporation above all else. Machiavelli forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Do we want leaders who are nice or leaders who are effective? Are we willing to accept a degree of cunning and ruthlessness from those in power if it guarantees our safety and prosperity? He challenges our idealistic assumptions and forces us to confront the often messy and morally ambiguous nature of power. His work isn't a guide on how to be a good person, but a stark analysis of how power works in the real world. By understanding his observations, we can become more discerning citizens, better able to see through political theater and understand the true motivations behind the decisions that shape our world. He doesn't give us easy answers, but he gives us the right questions. And that is why, 500 years later, we are still talking about Machiavelli. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the world of Machiavelli. If you found this fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the big ideas that shaped our history. Let me know in the comments, do you think Machiavelli was a realist or a cynic? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious. Here is where the shift happens. Once you stop seeing aloneness as isolation and start seeing it as insulation, your power multiplies. Insulation protects. It keeps noise out. It maintains internal temperature regardless of external conditions. Your solitude is insulation against distraction, manipulation, and the constant pressure to conform. Most people cannot handle this. They need external validation to feel real. They need feedback to know they exist. You do not. You have learned to validate yourself through results, through clarity, through the quiet satisfaction of being proven right when no one was watching. That independence is what makes you unreachable. Not physically, but mentally. People cannot manipulate what they cannot access. They cannot destabilize what they cannot read. And they cannot control what they cannot predict. Your aloneness has made you all three: inaccessible, unreadable, unpredictable. And in a world that rewards conformity, that is the rarest form of power. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Are you someone who has embraced solitude, or are you still fighting it? Comment below and let me know. And if you found this perspective valuable, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. There are others out there who think like you. They just have not found the right language for it yet. You might be the person who connects them to that clarity. Machiavelli also understood something about strategic withdrawal that most people miss. Removing yourself from a situation is often more powerful than dominating it. When you leave, people are forced to confront what your presence was holding together. Conversations collapse, dynamics shift. Weaknesses become visible. You do not need to announce your absence. You do not need to explain why you are stepping back. You simply stop participating, and the system reveals its dependencies. This is why powerful people are often the quietest in the room. They do not need to assert themselves because their value is already understood. And if it is not understood, their absence makes it undeniable. If you have ever walked away from something and watched it fall apart without you, that was not coincidence. That was proof that your contribution was structural, not decorative, and structures do not beg to be recognized. They simply hold or they do not. Your aloneness has also taught you to separate observation from participation. Most people are so busy being part of the story that they cannot see the story. They are inside the frame, reacting, adjusting, defending. You have learned to step outside the frame. You watch the pattern while others are caught in it. You see the cycle while they are repeating it. This distance gives you a view that participants will never have. Machiavelli spent years observing courts, kings, and power struggles before he ever wrote a word. His insights did not come from being the most active player. They came from being the most attentive observer. If you spend more time watching than participating, you are not disconnected. You are gathering data. And data becomes leverage when everyone else is still operating on assumptions. Here is the final shift. If you are alone, you have a choice. You can keep treating it as a wound that needs healing, or you can start treating it as a weapon that needs sharpening. Solitude is not the absence of power. It is the forge where power is refined. Every hour you spend alone thinking, observing, learning, you are building something most people will never possess. A mind that cannot be bought. A perspective that cannot be manipulated. A clarity that cannot be distorted. Machiavelli did not need armies to change history. He needed solitude, a pen, and the willingness to see the world without the comfort of illusions. You have the same tools. The question is not whether you are alone. The question is what you are building in that aloneness. Because the world does not reward those who complain about isolation. It rewards those who use isolation to become something the crowd cannot touch. You were not meant to fit in. You were meant to see clearly, and clarity requires distance. So stop apologizing for the space between you and everyone else. Stop trying to close a gap that was never a flaw. Start recognizing that gap as the exact place where your power lives. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago. The solitary mind is the sovereign mind. And sovereignty is not given, it is claimed. In silence, alone, without permission,